I was proud of some. I was proud of something every time I looked at myself in the mirror, even though I was 38 years old. I had been treated fairly by time. Consistent exercise, skincare, and a balanced diet and way of life. I was able to maintain my youthful appearance because of all of it. Despite the fact that Nathan's profession kept him away from home most of the time, he never stopped telling me how gorgeous I was. At times I would fail to recall that he had even said it. Early that morning, Nathan departed for his job. I savored the periods of solitude when the house was empty of sound. Taking a shower was my decision. I usually felt better after a soothing soak in the warm water and some time for myself. I donned a face mask and entered the shower after stepping inside the restroom. I attempted to relax and unwind as the water soothed my aching muscles. After I dried off in the shower, I changed into my red underwear. I had always loved red. I felt strong and attractive because of it. I removed the face mask while I brushed my hair with a towel and examined my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Even though I was 38 I couldn't help but think that Nathan would have been disappointed to see me in this state as I glanced at my reflection. If you want to see more interesting true stories like this, subscribe to my channel. If you want to see a really fascinating narrative, you should watch this video all the way to the conclusion. I had entirely disregarded Ethan's return at that very moment. After all his troubles, Nathan's kid had returned. But I must admit that I still hadn't adjusted to his presence. I had completely disregarded his presence at the house since Nathan and I were generally the only ones there. My train of thought was abruptly interrupted by the bang of the door opening. "Hey there, Ethan!" Almost yelled out loud. Standing at the door, Ethan was attempting to avoid making eye contact while he processed what had happened. Poor Clara. My apologies. The door swung open for me. Showering was going to be my next move. Feeling ashamed, he spoke with a trembling voice. We met gazes. I felt the crushing weight of that instant. My first inclination was to grab the towel, but by the time I realized it, it was too late. A strange electric current coursed through my entire body as Ethan's face turned a brilliant shade of red. Is knocking something you're unfamiliar with, Ethan? Despite my best efforts, my voice was trembling as I spoke. Yes, indeed. Expressing his apologies, he hastily shut the door. Nevertheless, the deed was executed. Those split seconds had completely disrupted my daily routine and turned my world upside down. Surely this was just a coincidence? My heart was racing, but why? Seeing Ethan in that state had ignited a certain enthusiasm within me. Despite my embarrassment, I found that I rather like it. As much as I wanted to shut the door and get myself together, all I could think of was the way Ethan had stared at me as I dried myself in the shower. This was the most exposed and defenseless I had ever felt. This is quite peculiar. I felt a mix of embarrassment and excitement. There was a period when I had no idea anything was happening. As I made my way to the mirror, my bewilderment set in. I stared at my brilliant crimson underwear as it clung to my body. Despite the effects of aging, my physique maintained its youthful allure. This time had been good to me, even though I was 38 years old. It wasn't simply my physical appearance, my eyes, hair, and figure. The appearance of everything remained lively and new. Thanks to my workouts, my muscles were toned and my skin was immaculate. They gave me strength, but as I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but think about the vigilant expression on Ethan's face. His perception of me is something I'd like to know better. Why was he even considering this? How thoroughly did he check me out? Even though I felt an internal struggle, I was unable to dispel these thoughts. My pride in my physical attributes was on full display as I scanned my own body. My crimson underpants made me look very cute. I immediately recalled that every now and then Ethan will exit the shower armed with little more than a towel. Out of nowhere, my gaze flitted. No one can deny Ethan's good looks. He was physically striking, but as I began to perceive him in that light, I began to experience a range of emotions. Feeling something for him, wondering about him within. Even though it had always been just an intellectual curiosity, I felt an odd resonance in my body when I thought about it. I felt a wave of remorse wash over me, and I found myself holding my breath as I watched him once more. Hello, Nathan. He was also a part of my life. He was a prosperous businessman who was 47 years old. He was too busy working to give me any attention. I had doubts about my marriage to Nathan at times. Did we truly enjoy ourselves? Perhaps I simply used to his presence and the solitude. It was as if Nathan had forgotten about me. After a protracted work trip, I just came to the realization that he clearly never cared about me. They made an effort to repair it, but the previous coziness was gone. Nathan was completely absorbed in his work and couldn't spare any time for me. That night was no different than any other. After a long day at the office, Nathan stopped by for supper. Aside from it, nothing had changed. However, that single sentence was all he said. Tomorrow he mentioned that we're attending a party. It seemed like the perfect diversion from my recent thoughts right then and there. An event indeed. Being with Nathan is a fantastic opportunity. Upon first hearing about the party a few weeks ago, my imagination ran wild with the idea of spending the evening alone with Nathan, capturing his attention, and igniting a little excitement. Ethan intervened, though. He spoke about his upcoming flight tomorrow night. I am going to pay a pal a visit. You two enter the party separately. I will have boarded my flight by the time you return. This was just how Ethan was. Things like these came easily to him because he appeared so much younger and more carefree. Nathan, in contrast, was totally engrossed in his task. Things like that didn't really concern him. There was an opportunity for me to attend the party, but Nathan's expression remained unchanged from the previous few weeks. Nonetheless, I yearned to demonstrate my concern for him, so I put on some clothes. I did my best to get myself dolled up in a crimson, figure-hugging gown, apply my makeup, and arrange my hair, all in an effort to wow Nathan. Unfortunately, not everything worked out. It didn't matter how nice I looked after the party. Nathan still wouldn't give me that night to myself. Under the guise of a business meeting, he planned to leave me home alone with his friends. For the second time, I found myself completely alone. On my own. I felt a breaking point within. I felt a great sadness, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I completely botched the opportunity to spend that evening with him. I was inebriated when I returned home. On my own. My heart shattered. Nothing about stripping down to my black lace underwear on the way upstairs stood out to me as I undressed, except for the fact that I was left naked after all my planning and wanting to spend the night with Nathan. My annoyance intensified. The dress in red. Beauty products. It was all in vain. Nothing filled me. My anger level rose slightly at that very second. On the other hand, I felt like I had to do something to get over this emotionally draining night. Going to the kitchen was my immediate destination. Perhaps that beverage. An ashtray, perhaps. I required some mental space. I needed to unwind for a second, in order to collect myself. After getting a glass of alcohol from the refrigerator, I retrieved a pack of cigarettes and lighted one. I experienced an unusually fatigued throat due to the smoke. It felt like the world had stopped spinning and was staring me down this evening. Something unforeseen transpired at that very second. As soon as I heard footsteps, I glanced over to the kitchen door. Hello, Ethan. Thankfully, Ethan had returned home. I was taken aback at that very moment, and I still don't know when he returned or why he was here. My mind had been racing with the prospect of a peaceful evening spent alone with Nathan when I looked up to see Ethan standing there. My reaction was so out of the ordinary. His friends' plans altered, and Ethan was scheduled to stay. His departure was cancelled, something I had never thought about before. Suddenly, we found ourselves in the same kitchen. I remained bewildered as I stood in the kitchen. It was completely surprising to see Ethan standing like this in front of me. It was quite out of character for me to stand there in my black lace underwear. I was discovered in that way, though. In an effort to hide my embarrassment, I took a deep breath and avoided looking at him. I'm sorry, Ethan, I whispered, my voice quivering slightly. Your presence here was unknown to me. Seeing you here is so strange, I had no idea. I ducked my head, avoiding direct eye contact. I was at a loss for words to describe the whirlwind of feelings I was experiencing. Ethan, nevertheless, approached quietly and didn't appear surprised in the least. Something changed in his expression. After a brief pause, he inquired slowly. How come you're so upset, Clara? Tell me why you're so angry. Something was off with his voice. It had a more genuine emotional quality this time. He seemed to be peering deep into my very being with those eyes of his. With a smile on his face, he approached. However, his expression was more than just a smile. Even his eyes betrayed it. Because I could really feel it at that point. My thoughts were all over the place. Both my body and my emotions were being affected by him. My emotions were all over the place and I could sense something quite different on the inside. Instead of running away from the impact of Ethan's honest stare, I walked over to meet his. His statements only served to further perplex me. I slowly lifted my eyes to meet his, and the genuine emotion on his face was palpable. I sensed his emotional as well as physical proximity to me because of the intensity of his stare. I had a little pang of brokenness, the disappointment of missing out on the perfect evening. It didn't take long for tears to well up in my eyes. Ethan whispered to Clara, "Do you realize how beautiful you are?" as he drew nearer. I was both relieved and horrified by his remarks. Nathan's employment has prevented him from giving you adequate attention, which I've seen, he went on to say. However, you are truly exceptional and stunning, and you are well deserving of this evening. Even though his comments brought me some solace, my emotions were far from settled. Just being in his presence was making me feel more complicated and intense, to the point where nothing could return to normal. I felt like I was being swallowed whole by the intensity of Ethan's gaze. My thoughts appeared to halt at that instant, and I cautiously advanced toward him. As I approached him, Ethan remained motionless in shock. His eyes changed expression, and I felt a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. Suddenly all of it transpired. All I wanted to do for a second was draw nearer to him, and release the tension that was building up inside of me, as I felt an overwhelming urge to kiss him. Ethan was kissed by me in an impulse. I wasn't really ready for it because it happened so fast. As our lips connected, I felt as though time stood still. Forget about it all in an instant thanks to the heat, my racing heart, and the tension in his body. Ethan was clearly expecting for me to return his kiss when that happened. I could feel his intense reaction in the flesh of my cheeks. With each gentle movement of his hand toward my waist, our physical separation became imperceptible. A surge of want overcame all the complicated feelings I was experiencing at the moment. Instinctively, I drew nearer to him as I could hear his breath. With our tongues locked, we hurriedly made our way from the kitchen to the living room. Our bodies pounded against the walls as we walked, and in the heat of the moment we held on even tighter. While Ethan's fingers scoured my entire body, we slammed into walls and made our way to the living room entrance. Eventually we ended up on the living room couch, both gasping for air. Out in the kitchen, Ethan's pants had slipped his mind. I found my black lace panties on the floor, next to the couch. Even though I was acutely aware of how out of place I was, I couldn't help but be utterly absorbed in the experience. While taking a few long breaths, I opened my eyes and met his gaze. Ethan saw the look on my face and gave me a subtle smile as he noticed how rapidly things had progressed. His expressions betrayed the extent to which I had an impact on him. "Clara, what happened?" he asked after taking a long breath and glancing at me. That was a mistake. I followed his stare, a mix of surprise and relief washing over me. I felt compelled to speak up, even though I was at a loss for words. It's simply, what transpired? While my focus shifted to him, I blurted out in the midst of my anger. "I am uncertain, though. It was only that I wanted to express how I really felt. I just didn't think there was any other way I could spend my evening." While stroking my hair, Ethan gave me a knowing nod. "Is it truly inappropriate for us to become so intimate?" "Is that so?" he inquired. As time went on, the sensation of Ethan's hands resting on my waist and his fingers caressing my body became more profound. A gasp escaped my lips. He drew near me, leaning in as he stared into my eyes. He started talking slowly, as if he were going to open up. "Claire, I had been duped. I was experiencing some very difficult times. However, he mentioned that he is currently experiencing a totally different emotion." I was taken aback by the authenticity of his voice. Additionally, it helped me relax. As he moved in closer, I found myself engrossed in the intensity of his gaze. "You are extremely near to my heart. These emotions catch me off guard. But I sense your presence, Clara. Feeling you is real." That was so near. In that split second, every feeling in my body merged. My heart, though, was racing. Ethan's remarks revealed the intricacy and peculiarity of the situation. However, something did exist. I could sense his proximity, his approach, and his movement toward me at that same instant. Hearing my thoughts had a profoundly different impact on me. Ethan, I was alone. I spoke slowly, re-establishing eye contact. Truly, I was on my own. However, at this exact moment, everything is changing. This is the first time I've ever felt like this. Eager, confused, and young. I sense a shift. I whispered, my voice quivering. At that same time, words failed me miserably. Still, the emotions that Ethan evoked in me were really genuine. Suddenly, the door swung open. Someone called out to Clara and Nathan. As he peered in through the entrance, he was taken aback by our presence. At that particular second, time stood still. As if time had halted. We stood there, frozen, looking into each other's eyes while Ethan and I tried to figure out what to do. What was happening between us? Nathan wanted to know. His expression is one of utter shock and fury. His breath was held as he paused for an instant, his eyes wide with shock. Everything went downhill from there. What in the world is happening here? My voice is rough and angry, he remarked. A moment later, everything was completely out of hand. Nathan's fury was evident in his booming voice. It shook the house to its foundations. His eyes betrayed his frustration and disillusionment. What in the world is happening here? Is that so? He inquired. However, his wrath and resentment were more apparent on his face than the question itself shortly thereafter. While pointing at Ethan, he trembled his hands. Leave this place immediately. No longer do you have a place in this house. His voice quivered as he spoke. I'm married to her. You can call her Mom. It was inappropriate for you to involve her in this. Who the fuck thought you were fooling around with that? Excuse me? How could the two of you treat me with such contempt? I was speechless. I was taken aback. I held back tears despite my eyes getting red. It seemed like everything was my fault at that time since Nathan was blaming me. I didn't know what to say. Should I even try to appease his wrath? Clara, why? What the fuck led you to do this? Then Nathan continued. Who am I to have ever harmed you? After suffering the unimaginable loss of a husband and a kid, how can anyone find solace? You lied while staring me down in the eye. Nothing more. Even though I was emotionally distraught, I refrained from speaking. I was too upset to say anything, even though tears were streaming down my face. The situation would remain unchanged. Yeah, I was aware of that. Oh, please go out. Nathan then yelled out. You two have lost all acceptance in this home. Trying to force us to leave. We met eyes, Ethan and I. For a while we remained silent, but we were both aware of the confusion that was building within of us. Ethan eventually said, let's go, in a collected manner. Nodding, I gave the signal. Escape from this place. My eyes welled up with tears as we stepped outside. Tears wouldn't have helped ease the overwhelming sense of shame I was experiencing. Everything was going around in my brain. I was bewildered and unsure of my next move. In a flash, everything had transpired. I was completely caught up in this chaotic situation since I had done impulsively. It consumed me to be with Ethan and to think of how much I had wounded him. In what ways could I have succeeded? While still sobbing, I covered my face with my hands and mumbled to myself. Remember what I told Nathan? Tell me how I betrayed him. The pangs of shame intensified as we progressed. I felt helpless and confused, but I hoped these emotions would go away eventually. Ethan withdrew, but even in his departure, I felt a flicker of optimism, if only momentarily. Pretty much go ahead and do it. As I watched him leave, I told myself that from this point on, everything would be different for me forever. I continued to advance. Despite the depths of my despair, I knew that time spent alone would eventually illuminate my path. I paused, took a deep breath, and summoned my inner strength. I would manage to overcome this. In some way, I would reestablish my identity. It would be like starting all again. I can tell you're really into the story if you've come this far. You won't want to miss a single word since there's a lot to tell. When you're done, click the follow button. Make sure you're signed up for updates and that you can comment on this story. Leave a comment with your opinions. I'm interested to hear from you. On that particular night, I lay there with my eyes closed, locked in a state of semi-awakeness. As the gentle wind fluttered through the drapes, I perceived the door softly creaking open. "Dale?" I whispered under my breath. "Could it be you?" It was clearly not Dale's voice that answered, though. Oliver spoke in an almost timid low voice. "I am inconsolable." Upon opening my eyes, I beheld the figure standing in the doorway. His face was partially illuminated by the moonlight as it filtered over his shoulder. My mouth sprang open in shock. It was odd for him to visit my room at this hour. "Is that you, Oliver? Is there an issue?" Quietly I inquired. There was an undercurrent of astonishment in my voice. "No, you have no idea. All I did was just no rest for me." As he entered, he made the statement. I sat up in bed and drew the blanket closer to me as he drew nearer. "Could you tell me what to do? Need some water? I can fetch you a glass." His body language conveyed his disapproval. "No, my intention was to initiate conversation, so long as I am not an annoyance." His words had an air of anxious strain that weighed down the entire room. "I reassured you that you weren't annoying me, but my voice betrayed my uncertainty. Nevertheless, right now, is something on your mind?" Before quickly looking down at the floor, he shrugged and locked eyes with me for an instant. "You have no idea. At times it seems like everyone is waiting for me to do something. No one but college and my dad. However, I am not under any such strain while I am with you." I felt an odd connection to what he said. I moved around a little and put my hand on the bedside table while I tried to make sense of it. "Please sit down," I commanded almost mechanically. "Are you prepared?" Reason being, this is no ordinary tale. On this adventure, our emotions will mix and our limits will dissolve. This is probably the first time you've heard a confession like this, so bear with us. Stay up to date and enable push notifications. If you've ever heard a story, this one will blow your mind. He was hesitant to sit down beside me at first. Placing his hands on his knees and sitting quietly for a minute, he exuded an air of innocent uneasiness. After that, he began to talk. He said, "I know my dad loves me," but he avoided looking at me. "But there are moments when I feel completely alone. As if his world isn't mine to inhabit." I was taken aback by Oliver's speech pattern. Optimistic and slightly naughty, he had always been. A carefree-looking young guy. It hadn't occurred to me that there was so much chaos beneath. Personally, I think that's pretty typical. You're maturing and evolving. These emotions will pass. Neither your dad nor I have ever met someone like you before, Oliver. He hesitated for a second before speaking in an almost whispery tone. "Is it possible that we will always be familiar to each other?" He hesitated for a second before speaking in an almost whispery tone. "Is it possible that we will always be familiar to each other?" Even in the serene environment, his words resounded. In my chest, an unusual constriction had developed. Looking at him was too much for me. I lacked the guts to figure out why my heart was pounding. I spoke carefully to Oliver about how it wasn't fair for him to visit my room at this hour, and how maybe he needed some space to himself. He responded fast as a flash if I expressed a preference not to be alone. In addition to sounding like a plea, his voice contained a challenge. I realized I needed to gather myself together at that very second. "Listen," I replied, my voice now more forceful. "Keep in mind that doing the right thing is essential when you feel this way. By the very nature of this discussion, I am your stepmother." He glanced over at me and my words slipped out of my mouth. A terrifying combination of desire, anxiety, and fragility was visible in his eyes. He called me Andrea, and the way he said my name made me shudder. I never intended to feel guilty about this, but it's hard for me to fathom how it might be when you're in my thoughts. When he did that, I should have intervened. Instead of letting him continue, I should have asked him to exit the room. However, I refrained from doing so since meeting that intense stare also compelled me to face my own emotions. Oliver could be made out in the room's low lighting. The expression on his face veered between a boy's vulnerability and a man's complexity. "Are you okay if I sleep here?" Asking in a low voice, he spoke it. My jaw dropped for one instant. I preferred not to probe his statements for their intended meaning. I ought to have perceived him merely as a perplexed youth in need of assistance. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool. "Sure," I whispered softly. "You are welcome to remain here if that helps." On the other side of the bed, he gently lay down. In an effort to gain my balance, I drew the blanket closer to me. I tried to keep my anxious feelings bottled inside. In the end, I was his stepmother. He was so young, only 19 years old. I took out my phone to pass the time. Dale had sent a message. "Tonight I will not return home," putting in all the hours at the office. My anxiety was already high before I read the message. I would not even need to consider the potential outcomes of this scenario if Dale were present. But at this point, recognizing Oliver's emotional state and reacting appropriately were my top priorities. "Are you all right?" I turned to face him and asked. With you by his side, he finally felt better, he whispered. To my surprise, his voice had a deeper bass. We remained motionless for some time. The same thought kept popping into my head. He is only a child. I must assist him in overcoming his challenges. However, I was taken aback when I suddenly sensed motion. As he came up behind me, Oliver moved in closer. He gently placed an arm over me and caressed my back. Despite my beating heart, I remained motionless. I muttered to Oliver, "Just what are you up to?" "I'm cold," he stated rather frankly. It seemed like it was about more than just being icy, though, because of his tone. I drew a long breath. This required my utmost care. Being so young, he was likely bewildered and battling to make sense of his complex emotions. I mean, surely this was just innocent? As I laid there motionless, I attempted to persuade myself of that. The intimacy was causing internal turmoil. My thoughts were all over the place and my heart was pounding. At least for the time being, I told myself I must end this. However, I was immobile. His voice reverberated through me like an irresistible wave, and he whispered to Andrea. Oliver's grip on my waist grew tighter. I felt the gentle caress of his warm breath on my neck. In my attempt to formulate a plan of action, I shut my eyes. I was consumed by an inner tempest. Do you not see this as a simple display of affection? I persisted in attempting to persuade myself. I knew he was asleep when his breathing became regular. However, I was unable to fall asleep. My heart was racing so rapidly that it seemed like it could be heard from across the room. My frustration with myself was overwhelming. To what extent has this influenced me? So why am I on edge? His vitality and youthful self-awareness, nevertheless. It unsettled me. This intimacy. I prayed this wasn't malicious. I, too, dropped off after a while, consumed by my racing thoughts and eventually overcome by tiredness. I opened my eyes as soon as the light entered the room. I felt a little pressure on my arm. Oliver remained sound asleep. The innocence on his face was almost childlike. He seemed calm and collected. I didn't initially think it was the innocence that made me uneasy, but that was when it hit me. Behind it all was the complexity. With a cautious motion of my arm, I rose from my bed. I looked back at him as I stood up. His broad shoulders, lofty stature, and those sharp features. Since our initial meeting, I couldn't help but observe his remarkable transformation. To myself I murmured, "Wow, he's matured." I was surprised by how much more mature it was. Something only a flash shifted within me. A peculiar self-awareness that I preferred not to mention was mingled with shame. I brushed it off, threw on a lightweight jacket over my pajamas, and bolted out of the room. I drew in breaths as I descended the steps. I told myself to pretend it was just another ordinary morning. I went to the kitchen to divert my attention. It seemed like a good idea to make breakfast because it would occupy my hands and thoughts. However, Oliver's body laying upstairs kept coming back my mind. Everything about him, his presence, his sleeping face, stayed with me, unsettling me. I reminded myself repeatedly. Everyone mistook it for a fleeting moment. There's no need to worry. No harm is intended. I will not exaggerate the situation. I went into the kitchen and got the breakfast going. Even as I tuned into the coffee maker's gentle hum, the sight of Oliver upstairs lingered in my thoughts. I needed to gather myself. There is complete mastery. My inner voice pleaded with me to remain composed. I was taken aback by Dale's voice at that moment. He greeted his sweetheart with a good morning. As he limped into the doorway, his expression bearded and exhausted. My body went into a frozen state while I pondered my next move. Suddenly I pushed on a smile. "Right now," I said. A peck on the cheek came from Dale as he approached me. Being so near to him made me feel even more anxious. Great aroma fills the room. "Will breakfast be ready soon?" he inquired as upbeat as ever. I spoke in a slightly higher-pitched voice than normal, assuring them that it will be ready soon. Over his shoulder, Dale yelled out as he departed from the kitchen. Then I'll take a nap in the living room. I've had enough. His approach to the living room sent a shiver down my spine. Could he find Oliver in the room if he goes upstairs? Who am I to speak? In what ways can I clarify this? I exhaled heavily as Dale's boots padded toward the living room. Thankfully, he had no plans to go upstairs just yet. Despite my shaking hands, I hastily assembled the breakfast table. I tried very hard not to draw Dale's attention to anything. His body was sprawled out on the couch as he dozed off the moment my eyes landed on the room. I felt a tiny bit better when I heard his calm breathing. At least I'm not in danger right now, I reasoned. However, it was insufficient to alleviate the unease I felt within. We can't continue in this manner. Some action is required of me. I set the coffee cup down on the table, my thoughts racing. Dale had come down from upstairs and Oliver remained there. I had to figure out a way to make things my own. The question is, how? Afterwards that morning, Oliver entered the kitchen as Dale was still fast sleeping. I felt uneasy as we sat at the breakfast table and saw his carefree expression. I clenched my fists over my coffee cup and did my best to act casually in response to his conversation. Out of nowhere, he said, "Andrea, you look absolutely stunning today." His voice was full of self-assurance and seemed much older than his years. Without realizing it, my gaze shifted to him, as if he were going to speak more but refrained. I responded with an attempt to maintain a steady tone of voice. "Thank you, Oliver." A moment's quietness passed. "Excuse me, I hope your day isn't too hectic," he replied as he began to prod at the eggs on his plate. "Notify me if there is anything I can do to assist you." His countenance was solemn, yet the quality of his words unsettled me. "At school there are many more vital things for you to concentrate on," I told you. Though kind, his remarks had given me the creeps. As he retrieved his luggage and made his way out the door, a slight sense of relief washed over me. Still, an odd sensation persisted in my chest. This young man, he's experiencing a new sensation, isn't he? Dale woke up about midday after Oliver left the house. After a leisurely breakfast, he prepared to go to work. The house felt more peaceful after he left. We sat down to a typical family supper that night, acting as if nothing had happened. Pretending like it was any other ordinary day, I went along with it. However, as soon as darkness descended, that peculiar tension began to resurface. Dale was contacted by phone. David, his best buddy, was in the hospital after an accident. With that, Dale made up his mind to flee. He whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart," while he got ready. "I will return at my earliest convenience." I escorted him to the door, stood there as he departed, and then shut it behind him. I had an unusually deep sense of loneliness. Even though I felt absolutely alone in the house, it was as if I wasn't. On my way back to the bedroom, I stopped at the door. The lock drew my attention. So should I secure it? Oliver, what if? Can we handle it if he returns? Attempting to pull myself together, I shook my head. Andrea, please stop. He is only a child. For what reason are you even considering this? The idea just wouldn't go away no matter how much I fought it. For some reason, I felt better after climbing into bed and pulling the thin cover over me. My eyes were shut. The unease, however, persisted. No end came to the night. Calm and peaceful. Still, there are moments when total quiet seems like the biggest danger. In my head, Oliver materialized, striding resolutely toward me. A chill went down my spine as I registered just how near he was. For a brief second, I was at a loss as to what I should do as the mental chaos escalated. Why is this taking place? With his gaze fixed on mine, Oliver leaned in my direction at that very instant. Even in myself, I could see the signs of reluctance and anxiety. My voice quivered as I spoke and I took a step back. Oliver, please. The anxiety was palpable in my slightly trembling voice. Your stepmother here. What gives you the right to consider something so outrageous? Oliver was taken aback, his jaw dropping in disbelief. Even though he suddenly halted his progress, the tense stillness between us only grew. This is impossible. It just couldn't be done. My thoughts were going all over the place. My countenance, which was a blend of bewilderment and terror, was likely conveying to him the level of unease I was experiencing as I met his gaze. How could he possibly come to this conclusion? I was absolutely bewildered. Oliver remained fixed on me the whole time, his breath coming out softly and trembling. He stepped back almost hesitantly to put some space between us, but the tension was palpable, as if it were resonating throughout the entire room. I have something to tell you, Oliver. I am not sure, I responded, my voice quivering. Something clicked into place as I glanced over at you the other morning while you slumbered. Dude, you're totally grown up now. You're an adult now. I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer, even if my sentences stumbled. I stared at him, trying to find the words to express how I felt as tears filled my eyes. I was at a loss for what to do as his gaze remained fixated on me as well. It's not only your age, it's your entire demeanor and physique. You're simply not a child anymore. I persisted, attempting to articulate my complex ideas. When you were a tiny boy, I had no qualms about letting you sleep in my bed. I see how foolish that was now that I can look back on it. That could have been really risky for us both now that I'm thinking about it. I said strongly but slowly that I would not inform your father. I'm sure you're the center of attention at university because you're such an outstanding young guy. In return for my remaining silent, though, you are welcome to spend some time with your aunt. Listen up, you won't be able to remain in this place. Oliver lowered his head slightly after being silent for a while. His eyes betrayed remorse. With a quiver in his voice, he pleaded with her not to inform his father. I apologize sincerely. I assure you that I will go and stay with my aunt. A range of feelings, fear, regret, and perhaps even a hint of emptiness, appeared on his face. However, there was more to it than that. I was at a loss for words. It occurred to Andrea. What if I had felt anything for Oliver? Is it possible that I erred? The burden of her thoughts caused her to take a deep breath. I was perplexed by his youthful vigor and vitality. A flash of vulnerability or emotional anarchy may have rendered my best efforts futile. I believe I managed it nicely, though. Whatever the case may be, I acted morally. She appeared to be mentally reviewing the occurrences as she nodded to herself for a brief period. There's no need to worry. Although it was strange and difficult, it is now over. Everything is fine now that Oliver is living with his aunt. At least for the time being, I feel like things are under control, albeit I was confused. Andrea sighed with relief and waited a moment. Truly, I'm okay, she told herself, as if she had finally found some serenity. What was ahead was obviously a mystery to her. As time went on, everything began to calm down. Oliver would act more and more normally on his visits to the house at first. Words and deeds that were uncomfortable previously disappeared. It appeared as though all the pieces were fitting together again. I felt some relief when school holidays rolled around because Oliver had moved back home with me. He had transformed himself over that period. He exhibited greater composure and maturity in his behavior. Those anxious times seemed like a distant memory. For Andrea, Oliver's return was a litmus test. She persuaded herself that everything had to settle down during those 5 months. Something had changed as Oliver returned to find out. He seemed more composed and mature in his demeanor. Anxieties and other uneasy behaviors subsided. When Andrea saw that Oliver was behaving normally again, she felt relieved. As far as Andrea was concerned, everything was back to normal. This point, Oliver gets it. He is aware of the limits and has come to terms with his circumstances. That long ago conflict? Nothing remains of it. After a few periods of silence, Andrea inhaled deeply. She wondered whether this wasn't the greatest option. It was taken care of by time. At this point, the dynamic is that of a typical stepfamily. I thought everything was all right for a while. I was really relieved because my husband Dale was away on a business trip for a week. At long last, I have some alone time. Here I could relax and let go of the burdens I had been bearing. Recently, Oliver had been behaving in a lot more adult manner, which truly calmed me down. Despite my reluctance to acknowledge it, our trials had ultimately led us to a more favorable position. I had assumed we were safe. Which night, though? It was unexpected. I felt an odd sensation of peace once Dale departed and the house was silent. I sank into a gentle slumber in my cozy bed. Although I sensed an oddity, what it was I had no idea. In the dead of night, I was startled out of my slumber by some sound. Someone was approaching my room when I heard a creaking sound and then the sound of footsteps. Upon regaining consciousness, I noticed a shadow scuttling across the floor. I thought my heart had stopped for one instant. My name is Oliver. My room was where he was. With a stealthy motion, he secured the door's latch. A chilling feeling of terror swept over me. What gives? Why is this fun? Though I couldn't put my finger on it, I had the distinct impression that something was off. I was helpless. Still I remained mute. This required my undivided attention. Is that you, Oliver? My voice was still tinged with dread when I spoke, but I was attempting to come off as courageous. Why are you in this place? I felt even more apprehensive when his calm tone and intense gaze locked onto me. Yes, Andrea, he remarked, as if nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. My only desire is to have a conversation. I long to be in your presence. My anxiety levels skyrocketed. What was his intention? His sudden desire to alter everything begs the question. Why? I was startled by the intensity of his gaze. He appeared to be prepared to test any and all boundaries, given his unwavering resolve and self-confidence. He advanced toward me, his eyes fixed on mine the whole time. At that particular instant, my entire being fought against him. On the other hand, he was drawing dangerously near. Instinctively, I began to back away, even though I didn't want to. I begged Oliver to stop while my voice betrayed my obvious discomfort. Excuse me, but I'm not prepared for this. Despite my mental screams, my voice came out as calm and collected. Will you be available tomorrow evening? In the evening of tomorrow, things will change. Count on my presence. This, however, is not the time. The effort to exit the room was an act of sheer willpower on my part. I couldn't take my gaze off of him. A tempest of bewilderment and defiance raged through my emotions, taking me apart at the same time as the circumstance appeared to be drawing me closer. Do yourself a favor and subscribe if you're absolutely dying to know what happens next, and would like to read more stories like this. So you won't miss an episode, be sure to turn on notifications. Your support in the form of likes and comments is invaluable. Their support motivates me to continue writing. It would be fascinating to know where country you are tuning in from as well. Keep an eye out for the upcoming chapter. That night, a dangerous secret was exposed in a moment of weakness, and it threatened to shake everything to its very core. Once again, Dean was abroad on business. Eventually, I grew accustomed to it. On the other hand, I had company this time. But I still felt an odd unease that words couldn't describe. It wasn't that I felt lonely. Rather, there was an inner emptiness that I wished I could ignore. I chose to do something for myself in order to clear my brain. A brief respite. Anything to temporarily occupy that void. My stepson Francis had gone to visit a friend, and now that Dean had left, the home was deserted. No sound. With the intention of unwinding, I put down a little glass, poured myself a glass of rich red wine, and took a seat. The next thing I knew, I cranked up the volume on the TV. The house was silent save for the occasional television flicker, and there was just me. I wanted nothing more than to fill the space and fight off the growing sense of loneliness at that very moment. The wine made me feel more at ease, and the sound of the television engulfed me. My internal strain appeared to release for an instant. Get ready for more riveting true stories much like this one. Subscribing to my channel is greatly appreciated. Please enjoy the video and watch it all the way to the finish because I guarantee you this story is worth your time. Leave a comment with your ideas as well. As if by magic, the door swung open. I seriously doubted it was Francis returning from seeing a friend at first. Just a few moments ago, I had been experiencing a profound sense of solitude. Someone was behind me before I could even comprehend what was happening. Unbeknownst to me, Francis had sneaked in through the door. No time to turn down the volume on the booming TV. I hardly had a second to react. I felt a sudden surge of humiliation wash over me as the noise level rose. Looking at one another in disbelief, we both came to a sudden halt. His gaze was perplexing, and mine betrayed the obvious embarrassment of being taken unawares. I felt a tremor run through my body. It was all a mystery to me. My heart was racing, and I was barely able to breathe as I swiftly spun around. It was already too late when I clumsily turned off the TV. In that instant, time seemed to stand still. Neither he nor I could face his staring eyes. We remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. There was a heavy, uncomfortable, and stifling stillness. I made an effort to compose myself. Words came out choppy because my throat felt parched. My apologies. I believed I was the only one. I mumbled something, but my voice was so unsteady that I couldn't even believe it. I could not bear the palpitations any longer. I could sense its radiance emanating from me. Francis was silent for a while, but then he smiled at me. A peculiar, nearly icy grin. Rest assured, he reassured her with a smile. At times, we all attempt to cope with feelings of isolation. "Okay, I see. Can you explain what he meant?" It was unclear to me. His words appeared multi-layered, as if they contained more meaning. Unspoken words. In his gaze, it seemed as though he was trying to find something. However, the very thought of it made me too terrified to do it. For a bit longer we remained motionless. I was at a loss for words to bridge the gap between us. Since I was at a loss for words, I simply stared at the floor. After that I said something, but it sounded strange coming out of my lips. As Francis stepped away, he avoided making eye contact. "I was just here to get something, but maybe later," he replied after giving me a quiet nod. He halted mid-sentence. He swiftly pivoted and exited the home instead. Everything seemed distant and entangled in knots at that moment. I felt totally unbalanced. Attempting to relax myself, I took a deep breath, but it was ineffective. Being fidgety made me uncomfortable. Everything went back to being a complete mess the second I thought I had it under control. I dipped into the house's stillness after Francis departed. I couldn't believe it. Out of nowhere, I sensed a complete shift. There was this emptiness inside me, as if something had gone wrong with my life, and the sound of the TV was still ringing in the room. I rose from the couch and gingerly made my way to the bedroom, but Francis's face lingered in my thoughts at every turn. I nearly began to question my own sanity due to how bizarre it seemed. For a living, Dean drove trucks. He frequently disappeared for days, sometimes even weeks at a time. He rarely made an appearance. This was normal for me, but tonight, this felt different. With Dean's departure and Francis's return, all those years spent alone seemed like a distant memory. My entire reality seemed to have turned upside down. After Francis returned from college 2 weeks earlier, he noticed a significant change. After spending a great deal of time alone, I found myself unexpectedly sharing a home with another human being. A grown-up. The grandson of my stepfather. I didn't know how to even begin to describe this. Francis was a knowledgeable, serious, and remarkable 25-year-old. However, something was awakened inside of me when I faced him in that way. His intense gaze made me feel as though he were observing me through a different lens. Gently settling onto the bed, I rested my head on the pillow and shut my eyes. Things couldn't get any more difficult in my opinion. This sensation, what was it? Were you scared? A yearning? Once again, I opened my eyes and remained in the shadows for some more time. I wondered what it all meant that night. I went to sleep after a while. However, my internal discomfort persisted upon waking up. Breakfast was being made as the first light of day began to peek through the window. But today I felt like something was missing. There was an air of odd carefulness about the house's contents. As the bread toasted and the teapot chimed, my mind continued to wander to the events of the previous night. Francis arrived at breakfast looking somewhat more composed, but his expression remained intense. He started setting the table without uttering a word. However, he broke the stillness first. "I apologize. I didn't intend to make you look foolish last night," he said. Now his voice is lower. "Trust me when I say that I slipped in without a sound. I was completely unprepared. I was preoccupied with other matters because I was also dealing with problems with Barry. Our breakup is recent. Sorry, I was preoccupied." I felt compelled to answer even though the topic of Barry seemed too sensitive to broach. "Francis, I understand. It's really not a major issue. It's simply, I admit that I can be a bit of a slob when no one is looking." My voice was still trembling as I spoke. Perhaps, though, he was able to discern my true emotions. Perhaps Francis was observing me with a keener eye now. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor at that point in an effort to mask the stress I was still carrying. I felt compelled to describe the situation and my emotions. However, there was still a sense of complexity even as I woke up this morning. Neither of us spoke much while eating breakfast. On the other hand, tension was still palpable that morning. That night, I sank into deep contemplation. I was still confused about everything. I was completely distracted by all the complexity. I went to my bedroom to read for a while. Word by word, the meaning of the book appeared to fade as I flipped over its pages. I still felt the aftertaste of the wine, but it was just what I needed at this very moment. At that same moment, I preferred to be alone with my thoughts. All of a sudden, a crack appeared in the door of the chamber. Francis stealthily stepped inside as I glanced up. I looked into his eyes and couldn't make out what he was trying to say. As if he were attempting to evade something, he merely drew nearer. He spoke with a little less volume than normal, implying that being alone like this must be difficult. I was speechless at that very time. His dad, Dean, was a truck driver, so he'd spent as much of his childhood as I can remember growing up alone. This sensation, what was it? Were you scared? A yearning? Once again, I opened my eyes and remained in the shadows for some more time. I wondered what it all meant that night. I went to sleep after a while. However, my internal discomfort persisted upon waking up. Breakfast was being made as the first light of day began to peek through the window. But today I felt like something was missing. There was an air of odd carefulness about the house's contents. As the bread toasted and the teapot chimed, my mind continued to wander to the events of the previous night. Francis arrived at breakfast looking somewhat more composed, but his expression remained intense. He broke the stillness first, but not before silently setting the table. His voice had softened and he apologized, saying, "I didn't intend to humiliate you last night. Trust me when I say that I slipped in without a sound. I was completely unprepared. I was preoccupied with other matters because I was also dealing with problems with Barry. Our breakup is recent. Sorry, I was preoccupied." I felt compelled to answer even though the topic of Barry seemed too sensitive to broach. "This isn't a huge issue, Francis, I understand. It's just that I tend to be a bit clumsy when no one is looking." My voice was still trembling as I spoke. Perhaps, though, he was able to discern my true emotions. Perhaps Francis was observing me with a keener eye now. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor at that point in an effort to mask the stress I was still carrying. I felt compelled to describe the situation and my emotions. However, I still felt like things were complex even this morning. Neither of us spoke much while eating breakfast. On the other hand, tension was still palpable that morning. That night I sank into deep contemplation. I was still confused about everything. I was completely distracted by all the complexity. I went to my bedroom to read for a while. Word by word, the meaning of the book appeared to fade as I flipped over its pages. I still felt the aftertaste of the wine, but it was just what I needed at this very moment. At that same moment, I preferred to be alone with my thoughts. All of a sudden, a crack appeared in the door of the chamber. Francis stealthily stepped inside as I glanced up. I looked into his eyes and couldn't make out what he was trying to say. As if he were attempting to evade something, he merely drew nearer. He spoke with a little less volume than normal, implying that being alone like this must be difficult. I was speechless at that very time. His dad, Dean, was a truck driver, so he'd spent as much of his childhood as I can remember growing up alone. Francis had it tough since Dean wasn't around very much. However, it was strange to hear it so close for the first time. "Didn't Dean's decisions force me to withdraw from you?" He spoke. His voice betrayed the intensity of his feelings, yet his eyes never remained motionless. "Diana, I will make sure you know you are not alone by doing whatever it takes." Unexpectedly, his words struck a chord with me, but I remained bewildered by their significance. His kind gaze was a stark contrast to the icy isolation I'd been feeling. When was the last time I had been this intimate with someone? With a long sigh, I averted my gaze. A sincere thank you escaped my lips, but I had no idea how sincere it really was. "Diana, my dear." I was surprised by how softly he began. Even though he kept his gaze fixed on the subject, a hint of nervousness was evident. My heart began to race that night when I discovered you watching television. It caught me off guard that he would bring up that night. I didn't know what to do. Would it be better to maintain my composure and continue staring at him, or to avert my gaze? His phone beeped once more as I was about to respond, I couldn't resist sneaking a peek at Francis's phone screen as his gaze shifted to it. Reiterating Barry stated it. The stillness was broken by the low hum of the phone. Even though Francis usually keeps his cool under pressure, he furrowed his brows slightly this time. He silently declined the call after taking it up, observing it for a moment. More than anything else, the action piqued my interest. Francis returned the phone to its place on the table and sat silently for some time. His knuckles were curled up and he stared down at the floor. Our mutual quiet reverberated across the space. At last, he looked at me after taking a long breath. With a newfound assurance in his voice, he addressed Diana. He stared without averting his gaze for an entire second. It bothers me when you're alone yourself. What you did that night was completely harmless. I get that you were lonely when you did it, but going forward. It seemed as if he were carefully selecting his words as he hesitated. I won't leave you alone anymore starting today. Whatever it takes, I will do. At first, I was at a loss for words in response to his frank and straightforward remarks. I didn't anticipate his candor to be that direct. However, those remarks also made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I began to speak to Francis, my voice barely audible above a whisper. In such a personal setting, it was challenging to find the appropriate words. I really appreciate you expressing this. Contrarily, you lead a life of your own. Concerning my isolation, you should not be overly concerned. A little shook his head. No, Diana, things aren't as you suppose. Dean is constantly popping in and out. It is very obvious that he leaves you alone. However, he looked at me more intently for an instant before continuing. That is absolutely not enough for you. Diana, I'm prepared to take care of you because someone needs to. His words reverberated within me. I stared at his face intently. What he stated was genuine, yet there was also an air of mystery, something I failed to grasp. I spoke to Francis more clearly and with more composure this time. I am amazed by your generosity. You are, however, my stepson. Both of us. I thought we were both aware of the limits, weren't we? With a subtle grin, Francis cocked his head to one side. He mumbled something about boundaries. The limits are clear to me. However, boundaries should not always serve as barriers between individuals. Perhaps we can all finally break down under the weight of this house's isolation. The doorbell rang at that very moment. We exchanged surprised glances. At this hour, who could it possibly be? Francis rose to his feet and made his way to the entrance. My heart began to race, but I remained sitting. The moment the door swung open, Barry's voice echoed across the room. His statements were filled with rage and a desire to challenge. Oh, so this is where you guys are, he remarked with an icy tone of voice. He looked at Francis first and then he looked at me. Francis, you picked the perfect moment to ignore my calls. Now I believe I understand. With a calm voice, Francis drew a deep breath. So why are you even here, Barry? Now is not the moment. Barry moved closer to Francis, leaning in for a hug. No, I think now is ideal. Because, he added, raising his phone to his ear, I had already heard everything. Certainly all of it. Because the phone was ringing, I overheard their entire discussion. Rest assured, I also taped it. My pulse rate dropped when I heard that. Every word we had spoken. Did they record everything? I could feel my heart racing. Barry, Francis admonished with an increasingly stern tone. This is entirely superfluous. Our words were completely benign if you had just listened. In a caustic manner, Barry chuckled. Not guilty. Is that right? Informing Dean will allow us to gauge how innocent it is. His gaze shifted to me. Sure, Diana, we can chat. See how Dean responds when he learns the truth. It had not yet worn off. The words spoken by Barry resounded within my mind. My voice was weak but firm as I commanded Barry to stop. My guess is that you're confused. You misunderstood what we stated. As he retreated, Barry clung on to his phone. Until I tell Dean, I can't say what any of this means, he added. He briskly continued, we'll be seeing each other, as he turned to face the door. In the near future. Before leaving, he banged the door shut. As if the air had become heavy, there was a deep stillness in the room. As Francis caressed his face with his hands, I found myself at a loss for words. Francis stated with a raspy voice that this isn't good. His expression changed to one of shame as he met my gaze. I spoke softly to Francis in case Barry informed Dean. I was completely disorganized. What had just transpired, Barry's intentions, and the possibility that Dean may discover the truth. It seemed like everything was about to topple over. There was a long period of quiet in the house after Barry slammed the door and departed. Francis remained still, lost in contemplation. His silence only served to heighten my unease. For 2 hours he was absent, engaged in a phone conversation with Barry. He kept quiet for a while, then he drew a deep breath and spoke up. He turned to face me and said, "I spoke to Barry." He spoke with a low, firm voice that betrayed his fury. "Tell me what he said." My heart was beating as I asked. An expression of loathing crossed Francis' face as he prepared to speak. "The only thing Barry wants is for us to tie the knot." Here he was threatening me. If I refused to marry him, he threatened to show Dean the tape. My jaw dropped for one instant. "Who would you rather marry?" I exclaimed, nearly taken aback. "This is really insane, Francis. Why is Barry acting in this way?" Frank was silent as he combed his fingers through his hair. Reason being, he's highly preoccupied. My relationship with him ended, but he couldn't accept it. Actually, though, Barry Diana was never someone I adored. Marrying him would be like jumping off a cliff. I know him too well. Doing that is something I strongly dislike. I was able to let my guard down a bit thanks to his resolve, but the seriousness of the issue remained unavoidable. "Then what shall we do?" My concern was evident in my voice as I inquired. "Dean must not be informed. He has a knack for misinterpreting details." Francis and I met eyes, and his expression was one of desperate need. "You have no idea. Meanwhile, all we can do is wait. We must find a way to deal with Barry's threats, but we must also take them seriously. In 3 days Dean will be back." My chest tightened even more upon hearing that. A span of 3 days. With the amount of time available, it appeared very impossible to discover an escape route. We were under increasing strain, even though Francis was resolute. At that very moment, the ringtone from Francis's phone resounded across the room. Both of us jumped back and stared at the TV. Barry wasn't the one making the call this time. Dean was the named one. In a flash, Francis reached for the phone and answered. "Listen," from Dean's voice was audible. "Things came to a close more quickly than I anticipated, Francis. I will return tomorrow." We were both taken aback by those remarks. In the morning. At this point we had only 3 days. Before saying, "Got it, Dad," Francis was quiet for a while. "When you arrive, we will be here to greet you." There was a dramatic shift in our facial expressions by the time the call finished. With a look of concern on his face, Francis set the phone down on the table and turned to me. "Tomorrow he will arrive." I knew then that the clock was ticking. There was nothing prepared, and we had only a few hours to eliminate Barry's danger. The anticipation of Dean's return was palpable, as if a tempest were brewing. During the evening we both discreetly went to our respective corners. We were crushed under the weight of the problem's intractable nature. Francis gave me one last look before he went to bed. I couldn't decipher the mystery of the mysterious stillness that resided in his gaze. "Diana," he whispered softly, "everything will be all right." Still, I had a feeling he and I both didn't buy into those claims. Even when I got into bed, I couldn't get my eyes to shut. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Brennan's threats, Francis's powerlessness, and Dean's comeback. In my head it was all a jumble. Not even Francis's serene expressions could dissuade me. It took me hours of tossing and turning before I finally drifted off to sleep. It was already the wee hours of the morning when I managed to go off to sleep. However, the peculiar sense of empty space upon awakening served as an immediate alarm that something was off. The piercing quiet of the home greeted me as I emerged from my bedroom. As I approached Francis's room, the harsh reality hit me as I opened the door. There wasn't a soul in his room. Every single drawer and closet had been emptied. On his bed, he found just a single sheet of paper. Even though my hands were shaking, I fumbled for it and started reading. "I am departing with Barry, Diana. I have made my selection. I had to go because I couldn't stand by and watch Dean destroy your marriage. My life is on the line so that I can right this wrong that I have made. Make an effort to comprehend. I promised you I wouldn't let you be lonely, but now I'm the one who will have to deal with that feeling. Ensure your well-being. Assure Dean that everything is okay. I may try to start afresh with Barry in the distant future, but just know that you will always be in my heart. Francis. I lost control of the paper. My chest hurt like hell and my eyes were on fire. He had sacrificed Francis's life for my sake. To alleviate some of the stress for me, he was even ready to wed Barry. The sound of the doorbell interrupted my mental wrangling. Dean showed up. In front of him I was at a loss. Even though I was holding Francis's note, tears were still streaming down my face. The door was flung open. The agony intensified as I beheld Dean's weary yet joyful countenance. He spoke up about how much he missed Diana. With no words to express my feelings, I bowed my head. With Francis's departure, I had filled every void in my soul. Heavy with remorse, I embraced Dean. In that house, Francis was my last true friend, and now he was gone. Dean was clueless. Nobody could ever tell him. However, the pain of Francis's sacrifice would never go away. I couldn't help but cry every time I tried to put myself in his shoes and imagine the anguish he must have gone through to leave that place. Francis departed. The reality that he had given his life for my safety was now something I had to face. You must have been moved by my narrative if you have continued reading this far. I promise you, there is a plethora of more information that you will not want to miss. To share your opinions on this story, click the follow button, enable alerts, and post a comment. I'm eager to hear them. I am incredibly grateful for your support. Some things in life don't seem important at all, but then you have a revelation about their significance one night. I had no idea things would turn around when Eddie returned home as Carl's son from a previous marriage. Still, I find myself sitting in my bedroom's dimmer light, attempting to gather my breath while I narrate this tale. Eddie came back and said he needed more practice taking night photos. Scenic vistas, crowded streets, and twinkling city lights. All of it appeared to be an explanation. Now that I can look back on that night, I see that none of those things were his genuine motivation for returning. There I was. That reality, though, was completely beyond my comprehension at the moment. My husband Carl had to take off that day for a work trip. When we were younger, the thought of being alone for a few days with Eddie didn't seem like much of a problem. However, I had no idea how difficult and risky those days may be. I felt a change occur within me the moment Eddie entered the room. The nerdy kid who had departed 4 years before had been replaced by a beautiful, self-assured young man. A feeling I couldn't put my finger on was aroused by his unflappable expression and unhurried pace. Eddie had returned the night before. I was doing dishes in the kitchen while Carl had already gone to sleep. Eddie whispered gently from behind me, breaking the silence and giving me a little jump. His voice was soothing but firm as he spoke, and I froze. "Angela," he whispered, "today you were really helpful to me. The tour of the city's best photo sites was fantastic. I wanted to express my gratitude for more than just that, though." I attempted to calm the unexpected surge of anxiety by taking a deep breath. "Eddie, what are you saying?" With a little quiver in my voice, I inquired. Eddie inched closer, his breath now gently caressing the nape of my neck. As he spoke softly and deliberately, he expressed his deepest gratitude for the way you have inspired him. "Something within me has been reawakened by you, Angela." The weight of his meaningful words made me gasp for breath. As I stood at the sink, my hands quivered with uncertainty, not knowing what to say or do. However, in that instant, in the soft glow of the kitchen light, an irrefutable spark ignited between us. And that's when things started to shift. If you're interested in continuing to read this story, you can subscribe and enable notifications. Leave a comment or like to express your opinion and show your support. Sitting around the breakfast table the following morning was our plan. Carl was discussing his upcoming work schedule as he gathered his belongings. As he stirred his coffee, Eddie sat at the head of the table in a relaxed manner. His level head revealed that yesterday night's events in the kitchen weren't monolithic. Every time he stole a peek at me, even though he avoided staring directly at me, it was heavy and I couldn't turn away. Out of my reverie, Carl's words interrupted. "Is tomorrow going to be another shooting night for you, Eddie? I thought Angela was really helpful yesterday." With a hint of amusement, he inquired. As Eddie responded, a small smile formed on his lips. Without a doubt, Angela's direction was superb. He spoke in a kind tone, explaining that he would never have taken such breathtaking photos without her extensive knowledge of the city. After Carl gave me his assent, he turned to face me. "Hi Angela, I won't be available today. Would you mind keeping an eye on Eddie? After being absent for 4 years, photography has become his life's work." He casually mentioned that he's fortunate to have your assistance, and he also let out a laugh. "Who knows?" he added, turning back to Eddie. "Eddie, you never know when this might turn a tidy profit for you." Even though he maintained his focus on the table, Eddie's smile became somewhat wider. "Dad, I hope so," he whispered gently. Nevertheless, my pulse skipped a beat when his gaze locked with mine. I felt a surge of unease build up in my chest. The more Carl's words resounded in my head, the more I couldn't shake the suspicion that photography wasn't Eddie's genuine motivation for coming back. Perhaps Carl was correct. Perhaps Eddie was merely in the office to get some work done. Though I had my doubts, I tried to convince myself of it. Carl, armed with his bag, stood by the door after breakfast, prepared to depart. Finally, he shifted his gaze to me. "Angela, will you kindly tend to Eddie? Prepare a wonderful meal for supper this evening." He answered with a smile that he will need the energy before his shot. Despite the mounting anxiety within me, I gave a silent nod. After Carl departed, the house's typical tranquility took on an oppressive quality. Eddie and I stood on a hill that night, looking down on the city with its streets illuminated like a blanket of stars. As he fiddled with the controls, he managed to capture the luminous sight. Looking down at the colorful lights, I was deep in meditation until his voice drew me back. He surprised me by calling me Angela, in a serious and purposeful tone. He brought down his camera and faced me squarely. "Returning here would have been pointless if you hadn't been here." For a second, I couldn't respond to his remarks because they were so simple and straightforward. Attempting to make sense of the whirlwind of feelings inside me, I inhaled deeply and redirected my sight to the city. However, my efforts to repress the emotions were becoming increasingly futile as time went on. We returned home when the filming wrapped. There was an aura of unsaid tension between us, even though the drive back was peaceful. There was an immediate and dramatic increase in the intensity of our connection the moment we entered the house and shut the door. Eddie pivoted to meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on mine as we drew nearer. "Angela," he said, his voice almost delicate, "you're attempting to deny the reality of the situation, but we both sense it, don't you?" His words made me gasp for air and my pulse quicken. My body just wouldn't budge no matter how much I tried to break free. Eddie approached, his aura commanding attention. There was no longer any distance between us. I murmured something along the lines of "this isn't right," but my trepidation revealed itself. I couldn't help but be captivated by the intensity and passion radiating from his eyes. Everything was about to shift at the crack of dawn this night. I was totally unprepared for Eddie's strategy. He finally spoke to me after what seemed like an endless period of stillness when he smiled softly and stepped closer to me. "A bit anxious, Angela," he whispered in a friendly, light voice. "Why don't we grab a drink and relax? Unwind a little and strike up a conversation. We haven't truly caught up in a long time." It was a moment of question for me. A part of me wanted to remain and see where things went, even if my instincts told me to get away and put some space between us. "Are you certain?" In a quivering voice, I inquired. A mischievous grin spread across Eddie's face. Indeed, he continued into the kitchen, saying, "Besides," as he walked, "I believe we've reached a stage where we can genuinely communicate now. While I'm 24 years old, you're 40. We shouldn't let our age difference prevent us from getting together, should it?" For an instant, I was taken aback by his remarks. His self-assuredness and charisma made it impossible to look away. He came back with 2 glasses of wine a few minutes after that. He looked me in the eye as he handed me one. "Angela," he continued, perhaps wishing to clarify everything, "you've known me from when I was a little girl, but I'm definitely not any longer. You should start to grasp that, in my opinion." That comment reverberated within me, awakening a part of me that I hadn't yet recognized. The fact that Eddie was no longer a youngster was something I had to face. As our gazes met again, I sipped my wine. The intensity of his stare and the subtle assurance he displayed. It was hard to avoid feeling some kind of impact. With each glowing review, Eddie deftly guided the discourse back to the present while reminiscing about the past. Angela, you are a really gorgeous woman. And I feel like your beauty has only grown with the years. What gives you your flawless appearance? His question drew me in, and I felt my pulse quicken, even though I was much more relaxed after drinking my second glass of wine. I was immediately put at ease by Eddie's kind, sincere attitude. Such a relaxed and candid discussion had been sorely missed. Over the course of the evening, the anxiety I'd been experiencing gradually faded into an unfamiliar feeling of relief. At last, Eddie placed his drink on the table and leaned back ever so slightly. His demeanor was stern but gentle as he fixed his gaze on me. As he spoke to Angela, his voice was much more measured and serious than normal. He was about to ask her for something significant. Inquisitive and little anxious, I cocked my head to the side. My part? You mean like a major thing? I inquired. After he leaned down, Eddie removed a little black container and set it on the table. It was a beautiful black frock that he gingerly unveiled as he unwrapped it. A provocative neckline and a form-hugging silhouette characterized the sleeveless garment. The light reflected off the fabric, revealing its indisputable elegance. I want you to wear this, he stated in a tone that was both soft and strong. I would love to capture images of you. Your beauty should be included in the frame as I capture the allure and radiance of this metropolis. I just can't help but notice it, Angela. It's like a work of natural art. His remarks astounded me. Looking up at him, uncertain of what to say, I held the garment in my hands, enjoying the feel of the delicate silk under my fingertips. Eddie begged me in his heartfelt eyes. His voice was barely audible as he pleaded. With Angela. Keep saying yes. A small part of me wished I could accept it as a harmless request. I gave in because I figured I could ponder about this bizarre and thrilling experience while I slept in later that night. Once Eddie had the images he requested. Unbeknownst to me, however, the events that transpired upon our return home were completely out of my league. Eddie's words and action had taken me by surprise, but they had also sparked an unanticipated surge of excitement. As I ran my fingertips over the dress's plush fabric, I stole a quick glimpse at it. Honestly, Eddie, do you think I'll be able to wear this? With a mix of shyness and skepticism, I inquired. With a subtle smile that exuded honesty and self-assurance, Eddie's lips fluttered. Without a doubt, he responded in a composed manner. Here it is in your size. To get an idea of your size, I even went through your closet. My pulse was pounding from his words. Some inexplicable emotion welled up in me as I realized how careful and considerate he had been. My closet was searched by you? I inquired, my voice betraying a hint of both surprise and anticipation. Eddie lightly shrugged. Yes, but simply to verify my accuracy. I hoped this evening would be memorable. With the tiny buzz I was experiencing, I took another glass of wine, which helped to alleviate the tension in the room. I finally spoke up, and I mustered a weak smile as I claimed it. I'm going to attempt it. This is a somewhat daring decision, though. Softly, Eddie chuckled. Yes, exactly. And you, Angela, are every bit as daring and eye-catching as this garment. I noticed my reflection in the room's mirror as I tried on the garment. I felt like $1,000,000 in that figure-hugging outfit. Something about it rekindled a sense of youth in me that had been dormant for a long time. After staring at my reflection for a while, I rose up, inhaled deeply, and went outside. There was a brief pause as Eddie took in my appearance. Without a single moment of distraction, he stared directly at me. As I had anticipated, you look absolutely stunning, he whispered. But there was adoration and passion in every syllable. It didn't take long for us to reach the city's less congested streets. Based on his demeanor, it was evident that Eddie had target shots in mind. He looked over at me as the automobile came to a stop, his expression one of pure joy. I think we should go for a stroll. He enthusiastically stated that the lighting here is ideal. I was unconcerned by the chilly wind that greeted us when we stepped out onto the street. As we strolled side by side, Eddie guided me with a gentle touch on my lower back and a steady grip on his camera. He abruptly ordered a halt, his tone pinched with concentration. The lighting is absolutely breathtaking. Stand still. I remained motionless, staring forward at his words, and grinned quietly. In the midst of complete stillness, the sound of his camera clicked. Eddie filmed me from a variety of perspectives, pausing to gaze directly into the camera on occasion. To be so unrehearsed is an enigma, Angela. He spoke with an air of sincere awe when he told you how beautiful you are. Our progress toward the shadowy section of the street was gradual. Whenever I faltered, Eddie quickly regained his hold on my waist and helped me to my feet. He cautioned in a protective tone. I felt both frightened and protected by the gentle touch of his palm on my back. Near a tiny wall we came to a halt later on. "Please stand here," Eddie said, his voice soft yet insistent. "You will appear stunning in these lighting. Just be yourself," he said as soon as he caught the hint of uncertainty in my gaze. "I aim to photograph you in the most flattering light imaginable." I tripped again while we were walking, but Eddie was there to catch me in an instant. At one point I was resting my weight directly on his shoulders. When our gazes locked, an undeniable unsaid force flowed between us. Even though we remained silent, the intensity of the moment was obvious. As the night drew to a close and we walked back to the car, fatigue set in. Because I was having trouble maintaining my balance, I drew nearer to Eddie and rested my head on his shoulder. In a low voice, I thanked Eddie for everything that had happened tonight. Eddie gave me a gentle hug and a smile as he put his arm around my shoulder. "Angela, it was incredible for me. It will always be etched in my memory that we shared this moment." We were silent the whole way home, but it wasn't awkward. The weight of our unsaid expectations was heavy in it. As I drifted through the night, my thoughts were racing and the city lights glinted through the automobile windows, creating temporary shadows. Within me, I felt both calm and a sense of disorder. I hadn't anticipated the sentiments that being this close to Eddie had sparked. Things had changed between us by the time we arrived at the house. Once we returned to the house, Eddie carefully led me inside. My inebriation and weariness made it such that I could hardly stand. As he gave me support, his hand remained on my back. "Allow me to assist you with the stairs," he whispered. He then promised to get something for her while she sat here. However, I stopped him in his tracks by reaching out and placing my hand on his arm. It was difficult to read Eddie's expression when he looked at me. Both astonishment and a hint of worry were palpable. The inebriation gave me the confidence to lean forward and kiss him passionately. The kiss was short but passionate. I noticed a mix of astonishment and intense want in Eddie's eyes as I retreated. "Angela," he said, his voice barely audible but dripping with an undercurrent that conveyed his unspoken thoughts and feelings. "It was because of you that I returned. I've come for that only." All of my internal turmoil was sparked by his confession. Suddenly, all of my thoughts disappeared. I felt utterly entangled in Eddie's attraction as I stared at him. I asked, my smile fading, "Are you sick of seeing this dress?" There was an undercurrent of mischievous rebellion in my voice. Eddie gently nodded, maintaining constant eye contact. With a gentle motion, my fingers slid down the dress straps that rested on my shoulders. My garment drooped to the floor like silk, collecting around my feet as I lay naked in his intense stare. Eddie's respiration rate increased, and our hearts raced against the background noise of the room's utter stillness. A similar process was initiated by Eddie, who gradually removed his shirt and let it to drop to the floor. As I studied him closely, my gaze followed every contour of his sturdy, muscular build. His removal of his pants removed the final obstacle between us. There was no one else around at that point. Allotted time, place. At this point it made no difference. As I sank softly onto the bed, my gaze remained fixed on his. I called out, my voice barely audible but inviting. Eddie strode over without missing a beat. His hands clenched the mattress by my sides as he drew near to me, his face pressing against mine. The tension between us was tangible, and our breaths were mixing. Everything seemed strange and right all at once in that instant. I gave in to the intensity of the moment as Eddie's heat coursed through me. I had never felt sober as I did when I first felt Eddie inside of me, and that was when I was intoxicated. Even though he was panting, I could tell that this was the moment Eddie had been waiting for years because of the joy on his face. With a palm on his heart, I whispered, "Eddie, I'm by your side and everything is beautiful." Eddie, his cheeks flushed and hair disheveled, stood tall above me. With a gasp for air, Eddie persisted. As my muscles tensed up and my voice quivered, I placed my palm on Eddie's chest. Even though it was painful, I could see he was having fun. Eddie kissed my hand and released himself as soon as he saw my fingernails. The extent to which my behavior will impact him was beyond my wildest imagination. Putting his head on my chest, Eddie laid down softly by my side. His gentle breath caressed my neck, causing a chill to run down my spine. His voice was gentle yet profoundly passionate as he spoke to Angela. "Because of you I returned. You have to get that. You are the one. For me you are everything." Whispered words and the tenderness of Eddie's kiss on my cheek were the last things that lingered in my memory. Coming here makes my heart sing. I felt my body relax and my eyelids close as I drifted off to sleep, escaping the bustle and embracing the tranquility of our intimate connection. Even more exciting was what transpired subsequent to that evening. That wasn't the end, I knew. That was only the start. The internal conflict and longing I felt would intensify over the next few days. But we'll get to those tales in due course. We will meet again in the following section of this story. Appreciate your attention thus far. Stay tuned, for there are much more thrilling moments to come. Keep an eye out for more updates. I am aware that my story has moved you greatly if you have come this far. You won't want to miss a single word of what I have to say. Make sure you subscribe, enable notifications, and share your ideas by clicking the follow button.